Okay, well, welcome to another workshop here for the test camp. Thanks again to our host back there. This is the FTCE Professional Education Major FEAPs. It's the second of the three-part workshop series for the professional education test. Let's just go ahead and learn and practice these test skills so that we can empower your test confidence. Now, those of you joining us live online, you're welcome to contribute your comments anytime. We'll try to get to as many as possible during the discussions. And if you join us directly on demand through the Test Camp YouTube channel, well, you're not here with us in person, but you sure have an advantage because you can pause or restart or replay that video anytime. Now, before we get started, let's go ahead and note that the workshop is the second in a three-part series. Many of you were with us in the first workshop, so you know that we did an overview of the entire professional education test based on the 8 competencies called the Florida Educators Accomplished Practices, or FEAPs. The second workshop here that we're in now is titled the Major FEAPs. We're going to have an in-depth discussion about each of the first 4 accomplished practices. Okay, and they're called Major FEAPs because that's a major portion of the test, correct? And then this afternoon later on, the third workshop, PED Minor FEAPs, that's an in-depth discussion about those last 4 accomplished practices, mostly about being a teaching professional. So here at the Test Camp, we provide training sites for teacher certification across the country, pretty much every state. Florida is partnered with a company that brands the tests that you see over here on the left-hand side. These should look very familiar to you. Over on the right, they're branded a little bit differently, and the tests are listed in this order because that's generally how they're required, right? You took the general knowledge, subject, and so on, okay? All right, so feel free to ask me any questions or come up here at the end of the workshop. I thought you might also like to know that you can see on the left that professional education test, that is a K through 12 certification test, so you're in good shape there. In many other states, it's by grade level. Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. You likely know that around here the motto is prepare, practice, perform. Complete the training for this test, you're guaranteed first attempt success. And that's because taking a test is a performance that requires more than just knowledge. Quality performance also requires skills, and in this case, test skills, and the confidence that comes from learning and practicing those skills. In the first step of the training, you'll prepare by gaining the knowledge about the test through these workshops. You also gain knowledge about yourself through the activities, how well you know the content, and the level of your test skills. Through the activities, you then practice the testing skills, like how to identify the types of questions by competency being tested, like we did in the first workshop. You'll learn in this workshop why that's important on all tests, but especially on the professional education test. Finally, the ability to perform your best will not be a concern because you'll have earned the confidence during your test skills training. So we start to prepare by studying the test format and content we talked about. That's called the blueprint. Some of you have been through some of these other workshops with us here today, and some of these online. Has anybody seen these on demand yet? Have you watched the videos? A couple of you? Okay, good. This is also a good first step to creating what we call my study plan. This is a schedule that helps you review and study the test content, kind of a guide for you. You create your own plan. More on that a little bit later in the workshop. Now this table provides an overview of the number of questions that are on this test. Most questions were constructed on the major FEAPs, nearly twice as many as the minor, as you can see up here. And let's take a couple of minutes to discuss what you might be thinking so far. Many of you were in the first workshop, some of you weren't, especially those listening online. So share your understanding of the test and the test questions with each other there at the tables. Bring up any questions you might have so far, and we'll come back as a group and compare your ideas and thoughts. Thanks. Hey, those of you joining us today live online, share your thoughts and we'll include them in the discussion. And if you're joining us on demand, this might be a good time to pause the recording and list some of your thoughts and questions. And if we don't address your questions here today during the workshop on this video, come by the camp office on the website and leave a written message. Maybe give us a call. We'll get back to you. All right, so back to the workshop. We'll be here when you restart the video. Okay, we're back. In the first workshop, we noted that we had a good question. The questions are mixed. on the test. So there's not separate subtests like maybe you had, remember on the core, you had the 4 separate subtests: English, language skills, then reading, then the essay you had to write, and then mathematics. That's not the case for professional ed, all one big test. The time allotted is 150 minutes. The number of questions was recently reduced from 120 down to 100, but you may have a few extra questions because sometimes the test writers are trying to test out validity and reliability on new questions. And knowing this, of course, puts you on a pace for success. You'll want to mark and save most of the questions the first time through. I don't think anybody that's trained with this answers more than 30, 35 of these on the first time through. But anyway, you'll get to that during the training. You'll see how that works. All right, and so since there's over 1 minute allotted per question, you won't get stuck. There's no sense losing your momentum because you'll be marking and saving those questions. All right, let's begin the problem solving here. Your first step is to identify what types of questions. Now again, we're not talking about question format here. We know that all 100 multiple choice questions are multiple choice. What we're talking about is to identify the competencies, the FEAPs. Okay. And we're also going to talk just briefly here. We talked about in the first workshop, who decides? Who decides what it means to be competent teacher? Well, it's these test writers that are hired by the test company. They do a really good job of representing what is current educational culture, especially here in Florida. For example, here's the first competency. It's called planning, and the test information guide is a bit more specific. Okay, so that's what they say. Okay, and you'll find here in this workshop that understanding the conflict between some pairing statements here is going to help you understand what's called a preferred approach to planning. All right, here's that first pairing that we had here. We talked about project-based or design thinking. All right, do you remember that one from the first workshop? So it's top-down versus bottom-up. We talked about group collaboration versus individual responsibility. The top answer here, the top answer is thank you for pointing that out, is probably the preference, cooperation over competition. And who's responsible for the learning? The teacher or the students? And we agreed that it's the students. The teachers are responsible for the learning. It's their job to ensure that the students are successful. And are the students supposed to ever fail? No, right? You remember this pairing of perspectives? How about this one? There's a lot of chatter out there about higher level thinking, not too much about fundamentals, and definitely not rote learning. All right, so our question to you then, and you can talk about this at the tables, is what's the impact of your preferences? I mean, you know, the test writers did their job. They show the preferences that are represent the culture today. But what about your preferences? You know, how's that going to match up when you're trying to answer these test questions? So think about that. Talk about it amongst yourselves. We'll come back as a group and compare your ideas. Hey, those of you joining us today live online, thanks again for sharing your thoughts. We're going to include them right up here in the discussion boards. And if you're joining us on demand, this is a great time to pause the recording and think this through a little bit. What are your preferences, and how does this current education culture affect the test and your preparation? So we'll resume the discussion when you restart the video. We'll be here. Well, the preferences are evident in sample planning test questions that we're going to take a look at here in just a minute. Here's the first example right here. We always start down there at the bottom, and then see if you recognize this as a planning question once you look up there in the stem. Okay, right over here. Right, it says planning right there in the stem, right. What else do you notice? Well, the main idea here is that standards are to be included in the plan. Right. Here's another example. Starting at the bottom. So what's the main idea here? Yes, types of objectives. It even says it there. So you'll want to be familiar with these. we'll talk way more about these over in the training center. You'll be fine with these. How about the this example, starting at the bottom? Yep, this is that Bloom's taxonomy, isn't it? And these are popular terms used in the current education culture, so be familiar with these. A couple more planning examples. Vygotsky, scaffolding. I think the main idea here is that students are not to be challenged, at least at a level that might cause them failure. What do you think? Precipitate into manageable difficulty. That's what we were told. All right, let's see if this connection in this next example here. Down here at the bottom, auditory, field dependent, field independent, kinesthetic. Okay, right. You're not supposed to set them up for failure, so that means you need to know something about the student as a learner. Okay. And you might want to know about that parts of the brain guy too that's been misused over time. Okay, next one. What you're thinking here, these are some of the isms. Yes, ding, ding, ding. You came to the first workshop. Constructivism, that's been in vogue for some time now. And as you'll see, when we look at the other FEAPs, this is the concept that cuts across the entire test, starting with the students. All right, so we summarize best practice planning. We could say the teacher is responsible. You know, you're a public school worker, a government worker, so you consider both the standards and the learners. This means understanding both. Teachers, at least on this test, are expected to conform to the constructivist theory. That is, that learning takes place best when it begins with the learners and their experiences, and then ends up with evidence that achievement has been done. They've met the standards. Okay, you have that? The next major FEAP then was in learning environment, and here's a description provided by the test information guide. And what's the key idea here? There you got it, right, student-centered environment. You might remember that these preferences discussed in the first workshop. This is the first pairing here. See, it's student-centered. How about their academic progress? Remember this? Stays confidential. Students are to remain safe, feel safe, non-threatened. How about when you get a new student in your class? All right, so you see the student-centeredness starting to take shape here. Here's one more example, I think, here. Diversity. Before we take a look at more sample questions, go ahead and discuss this concept now, this whole idea of student-centeredness and what might be the impact, especially on these test questions. You know, what would an incorrect response look like? And we'll come back as a group and compare your ideas. Thanks again to those of you joining us today live online. Continue to share your thoughts. It's been very helpful during our discussions. If you're joining us by the Test Camp YouTube channel on demand, this might be a good time to pause the recording and consider your concept of student-centered. We'll be here when you restart the video. Let's go ahead and start. All right, ready? Let's go ahead and see. Student-centered is evident in this sample environment test questions we got coming up here. All right, we've talked about this. We're finished with this discussion about it. You pretty much have this down. Let's look at some test questions, starting down there at the bottom. Okay, look at there, challenging, huh? Wow, sure I would do that one. How about this next one? Contacting the parent. Huh. Building in rewards. What if the kid doesn't get the reward? That's done out there a lot, token economies. So I'm thinking we're probably going to go here. Read the question. All right, so this is an environment question here. The main idea is about the student and student-centered environment. All right, let's try another one here. Starting down here at the bottom. right? It's about the behavior, isn't it? So this is an environment question. The main idea then is about student-centered environment. In this case, it's about the student's dysfunction. Okay, back here you had a question. I'll repeat it for those listening or watching in on the video. Is the student ever to be held accountable for their behavior? Well, for subject-centered teachers, this does seem to cause some frustration. How many of you are teaching what's called secondary school, so higher grades than sixth grade? Quite a few. So you tend to be maybe a little more subject-centered. I mean, you like your students and everything, but it's not about getting to know the students. So you may have a little bit more of a challenge on this to recognize the correct answers. But yes, that's the way the current, the current culture is about looking at the expanded role of the teacher. It's Mr. Henderson in this case, right up there. He's expected to know that Marissa, she's not fully in charge of her behavior. She lives in fear of being rejected by her peers. So maybe this is a good time. I think we did build a break in here, so that'd be something to talk about here. What about the role of the teacher in this case? This expanded role where when I was teaching, students adjusted to the teachers, and now the teachers are supposed to adjust to every single student. What you're thinking about that? Help each other out. Let's just kind of flush that out. We'll compare your thoughts as a group when we come back. All right, again, if you're joining us today live online, share your thoughts. We're going to include them in the discussion. And if you're joining us on demand, this might be another good time to pause the recording and consider your preference in terms of the role of the teacher. That's a place to start too when you're going back maybe through textbooks later and trying to study for the test. How will your perspective affect your ability to answer the test questions correctly too? All right, we'll be here when you restart the video. Okay, back up here. Here comes another sample question. We're going to begin here at the answer set. And you might find the correct response without even having to look up at the stem on this one. They're not going to do this for sure. Not going to penalize the kid. We know that's not coming. So yeah, I don't think we even need to read the top, but go ahead. You can go on up there. The best approach. Well, we know the best approach is a student-centered approach, of course. Okay, let's go to the next sample here. Starting down there at the bottom. Okay, did you get it? What did the teacher do? She nodded to Jessica, right. So she's got a trusting relationship going there, right? It's non-threatening. Here's another example, starting down there at the bottom. All right, let's look at one more. Oh, that was the last one. Okay, so what can we say about the teacher then in terms of learning environment? Okay, according to this up here, they're understanding mostly of the students in their charge, both in terms of their motivation and their behavior. And the environment and the teacher is expected to be non-threatening, both the teacher and the environment. Teachers are supposed to keep students safe. They're supposed to protect their privacy and promote classroom harmony. In all class situations, academic or social, no discourse, no discussions that might provoke or challenge. All right, we do not want to make the student feel uncomfortable. That's part of the new culture. You've probably seen it going on here in Florida, and it's even creeping its way up into the colleges. And it doesn't matter if we agree or disagree, and I don't need my tone of voice to come in on this at all. I'm just saying, on the test, their job, the test writer's job, was to represent what's going on here in the state of Florida. That brings us to the teaching strategies. And here's the test information guide description. This appears to be the key phrase right here. Okay, that's what separates strategies from planning, right? Strategies is what you actually are doing. Okay, so do you remember this? Teachers lead, students follow, at least in a public school. And then what's more valued, knowing your students or your content? Both important, but one's more valued. Everything begins with the student. And it's your job to let them know how well they're doing. It's not up to the student to try and figure it out. The teacher's supposed to tell them how well they're progressing. Here's just an answer set. Can you get a sense of what might be asked here? Which answer has the popular phrase in it? Can you find it down there? Ding, 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 critical thinking. What do you notice about this set of answers? Yes, they're talking about questioning, right? Types of questions. The correct response is not what's important here. To prepare for the test, you just want to make sure you understand that this is a strategies question. Okay, here's another example. Which one of these might be the worst response? Okay. Here's another example. It's about wait time, isn't it? Again, another strategy. Do you remember this from your studies? If you think about it, the teacher has to plan the question, ask the question, then field the student response. So it's all part of it, like we're doing here today. One more example down there at the bottom. So how can we summarize the expectation of a teacher on this test in terms of teaching strategies or instructional delivery? The pattern seems to indicate that the teacher is proactive, right? They're ready as a leader in each lesson. They're armed with a variety of questions and questioning skills. They're also considerate, especially when it comes to their unique set of learners. Specific praise from the teacher lessens the student's confusion. All right, and the final major FEAP is assessment, and I believe this has more test questions than any other section. We'll look at that again. Here's how it's described in the test information guide. And again, the key words we focus on here: differentiated. They call it here various type, but also known as differentiated. Okay, not just one single type of assessment. So if you think about it, just to take just a moment here, planning accommodates different motivation and learning types. The learning environment is cooperative and non-threatening. The teacher strategies have a wide array of questioning techniques, and now various types of assessments to determine if the goals are met. So again, it's the school and the teacher is accommodating the student. It's not the student's job to adjust to the school or to the teachers. Do you remember this pairing? Which is more important? Are you familiar with these phrases here? Criterion reference and norm reference. And we discussed the differences here too in the first workshop. All right, let's take a look after this one. We're going to look at some assessment test item samples, questions, okay? Here's the first one starting down there at the bottom. Yes, you are correct. Expects to be tested on some assessment terminology. Probably 3 or 4 questions out of 70, that can make a big difference. And of course you have to apply your assessment knowledge. Now we're not going to take time to read this here today, but know this is one you'll likely mark and save because you just don't want to slow the test down. It's only worth 1 point. You can come back to this one. You'll have plenty of time later in the test. What do we say, 2 hours, 120 minutes? No, 150 minutes. Wow, you have plenty of time, but you don't slow down. You save this one for last. Here's another one. Is everybody here familiar with this term? It's very popular, authentic assessment. If not, jot that down. That's one to look up. Okay, and here's another one here. Remember, the professional education test qualifies teachers for all grade levels, kindergarten through 12th grade. So if you're here and you're in secondary school, you might see some examples asking about younger grades. But that's why you're taking a test that qualifies you to teach at any grade, even if you don't plan to do that. All right, let's look at one more example, starting with just the answer set here. So again, you can likely eliminate the worst responses here. Definitely that student self-evaluation, peer evaluations. It's up to you, right? So the worst responses are which two? Yes, students on this test would not self-evaluate or peer evaluate. All right, so what can we say about assessment? The teacher is knowledgeable about the types of assessments and how to use them. They are responsible for making the correct choices and understanding the state's goals. Okay, so that was a more in-depth look into the major FEAPs. You can name all four now in order. Could you do it without looking? The first FEAP is planning, 18 of the 100 questions. Second FEAP is environment, non-threatening, promotes achievement of the state's goals, 18 questions. Oh, 15 on this one it says. Okay, third FEAP, strategies, that's the 18. This is when you're on your feet, student-teacher relationship. And about 14 questions related to assessment. So okay, I had that wrong there. So they're pretty evenly distributed there. That's 65 questions, I think, if we add that up. It's supposed to be 36, 46, 56, 65, right. Okay, so they're all there. All right, 65 questions, which is about 2/3 of the test. All right, so can you see why focusing on these competencies is important? Okay, this has been helpful here. All right, so we got one last question for you here today. Which would you choose? Whoops, let's back up here. Which would you choose? If you were to take the quizzes today, which one is least challenging? If you had to take a test and they would give you a test on just one of these four, which is the one you feel strongest in right now? All right, or the most challenging, either one. All right, talk it over at your tables and we'll discuss your preferences as a group. If you joined us today live online, share your thoughts. We're going to include them in the discussion. And if you're watching this pre-recorded video, this is the last chance to pause the recording and do a little self-reflection. Which would you choose, and how do you prepare for a standardized test? Come back and join us and restart the video anytime. Okay, we're back up here. Interesting discussion about the strategies. We've always talked about this in all of the workshops. There's no real right way to do this. Everybody has their own personal approach. But we're glad you came here with us today at the workshop and started to prepare for the test. You joined the workshop. Did you gain some knowledge about what to expect? Okay, another way to prepare is to talk about the resources, the tools that you can use to guarantee your success. You know what we mean by this. You're going to see over in the testing center that there are encouraging messages. Have you seen these? Can you tell them about those? And I'll repeat for the people who are listening to the recording. Go ahead. Yes, that's true. The people that have gone before you, they've passed this test, they leave us messages. We post them up here. Oftentimes they're encouraging messages. In this case, the message is almost like a warning, but their suggestion is do not spend a lot of your time and money on expensive resources for this test. It just doesn't work. You don't need them. Commercial webinars, that's a good example. No sense paying out money for free test information and for strategies that really don't have a place to practice. So that's one of their warnings. Another one is expensive tutors and these tutor companies that want to charge. That might be an option for a more challenging test, like say, I don't know, chemistry or anatomy and physiology or something. But this is test content that you learn through your program, and what they're suggesting is avoid the study guides. Unless you have the right study guide, the best place to go is to go straight to the textbooks. Right? It's in your classes in the textbooks. Now, if you do get a study guide, then it needs to be an inexpensive one. And you can find one right there in the My Resources area. That's over at the training site. Yep. And look at there, $5. If you can read that in the back. Yeah, used copies. You don't need to pay $40 or $50 for these. So many of the resources are free or very inexpensive. There's the test information guide up there. That's the most up-to-date tool. Tells you everything you need to know about the test. Okay, so what they're suggesting is instead of investing time and money on resources, invest in yourself. come on over to the training center, practice your test skills, expect to gain confidence, expect to gain personal independence, and skills that you can pass on to your students. So when you get over there, you're going to see that you get all of this. Your pass includes admission to all of the training areas, all the activities. Starting up there with My Test, you can check your understanding of the test blueprint. It's kind of a fun little way to see if you actually understand this test or not. Everything we talked about here today. There's even a pre-test that you can take. I believe it's 20 questions. This is the test camp problem solving system. It's the other activities we have here where most people spend most of their time. That first competency is finding the correct answer is up there at the top. That's identify the type of question by the competency. It's just what we've been doing here today. Quizzes and tests are provided over there. You get multiple. Was this going to be your question? Yeah, you asked me before. You get multiple attempts on these quizzes and tests, and they change each time too. So here's some examples of the professional ed. They change each time because there's a large storehouse of questions, and each time the computer pulls that up for you, it gives you different questions and randomized answers too. Same with the practice test. They have features on them like you can expect on test day, like the timer, for example, or that mark and save button. You can even earn points towards a professional test certificate with that post-test, passing the post-test. 80%, so you would need, if it's say it's 40 questions on this section, maybe it's 65, might be 65, so you would need 80%. Okay, so then you expect to perform with confidence because you have the knowledge and skills earned during the training. So, all right, we'll hope to see you in the next workshop. There's no better time than now to empower your test confidence.